They say hospitals are places of healing, but after midnight, when the fluorescent lights hum too loud and the hallways stretch longer than they should, they feel more like tombs. The air is cold, not air conditioning cold, but something's watching you cold. Every step echoes, every door creak sounds like a warning. That's what Sarah Collins felt the first night of her new job at St. Augustine Memorial Hospital. She wasn't new to nursing. She'd worked night shifts before, but this place was different. People didn't talk about it directly, but the whispers traveled. Stories about that room on the 3rd floor, room 312. Stories about doors opening by themselves, footsteps that didn't belong to anyone, voices calling out when nobody else was there, but it was just talk, right? Her first shift started at 11 p.m. sharp. The other nurses were getting ready to leave. The older ones had this tired, dead-eyed look, like they'd seen too much. One of them was Margot Price, a seasoned nurse with streaks of grey in her hair. She was stuffing her bag into her locker as Sarah walked in. "New girl, huh?" Margot glanced over her shoulder. "First night on the 3rd floor?" Sarah nodded. "Yeah, I guess you're about to tell me it's haunted or something, right?" She chuckled, trying to play it cool. But Margot didn't laugh. She pulled her locker door shut with a slow clang and locked it. Her eyes didn't leave Sarah. "Listen close, rookie." Margot's voice dropped to a low, serious tone. "If you hear someone call your name tonight, don't turn around." Sarah's smile faded. "Ah, good one," she said, but her voice had a crack in it. Margot didn't blink. She leaned in, so close that Sarah could smell the faint mix of coffee and mint gum on her breath. "I'm not joking, honey," Margot whispered, her eyes sharp as glass. "They know your name." Sarah felt a shiver run up her spine. It was probably just one of those scare the new girl initiation things. Every job had them, right? Right. She forced a grin, grabbed her clipboard and waved it off. "Got it. Don't turn around if someone calls my name. Easy enough." Margot shook her head slowly, lips pressed tight. "Easier said than done," she muttered as she walked away, her footsteps fading down the hallway. The night shift was calm at first, too calm. The 3rd floor was dimly lit, with only the emergency lights casting a pale green glow down the hall. The air felt colder up there, like the AC was cranked too high, but Sarah swore it wasn't this cold earlier. She rubbed her arms through her scrubs, glancing down the hallway. "Okay, no big deal," she whispered to herself. Her voice echoed back to her, too sharp, like someone was standing at the end of the hall repeating it. She checked on her patients one by one. Mrs. Halverson in room 305 was asleep. The soft beeps of her heart monitor was steady. Mr. Jansen in 308 snored so loudly she had to stifle a laugh. But when she passed room 312, she felt it. Her heart stuttered in her chest, and her steps slowed. The door to room 312 was closed, as it should be. Nobody was in there. It was marked as unoccupied on her chart. But still she could feel it. That feeling. Her feet hesitated. Her eyes stayed locked on the small window of the door. Nothing but darkness inside. Her breath fogged the glass as she stood there for too long. "Keep walking, idiot," she muttered to herself. But just as she turned to leave, she heard it. A faint sound, like a click. Her eyes darted to the door. Her heart thudded. It wasn't loud, just the sound of a lock unlocking. Her eyes went to the handle. It didn't move. The door didn't open. "Loose latch," she whispered, convincing herself it was something simple. She walked away, shaking her head. "Loose latch. Old door. It's fine." At 1:12 a.m., she was back at the nurse's station. Coffee cold, eyes tired. She sat in front of the security monitor and scanned the feeds. 8 cameras covered different parts of the 3rd floor. She could see everything from here, the hallways, the patient rooms, the entrance to the stairwell. Everything was quiet. Her fingers tapped on the desk. She hated how loud it sounded. Her eyes scanned the screens again. One camera caught her attention. Cam 3, facing the hallway where room 312 sat at the far end. Her heart stopped. The door to room 312 was cracked open. "No," she muttered, squinting. It wasn't much, barely an inch, but she was absolutely sure it was shut before. Her breathing got shallow. She tapped the screen as if that would fix it. The camera was a little blurry, a little grainy, but she could see it. Her hand hovered over the walkie-talkie. Her thumb pressed the button. "Ben, you there?" Static buzzed for a second, then a man's voice came through. "Yeah, I'm here. What's up?" "Third floor," she said, eyes still locked on the screen. "The door to 312 is open. Can you check it out?" "Again," Ben groaned. "All right, on my way." A second later, she saw him appear on the camera. Ben was a big guy, ex-military type. He walked down the hall slowly, flashlight in hand. The beam flicked side to side, scanning the hall. "Yup," he said through the walkie, his voice a little breathy. "Doors open, latches busted, I think." "Can you close it?" she asked. Yeah, he muttered. He put his hand on the door, nudged it open wider, and aimed his flashlight inside. He froze. "Ben?" He didn't answer. Her heart started pounding. "Ben, what's wrong?" Ben tilted his head. His flashlight flickered, but his face didn't move. His eyes stayed wide, unblinking. He was facing the room, but his head started tilting slowly to the side. "Ben, you good?" He moved, but it wasn't right. His arms stayed at his sides, stiff as boards. His head snapped to the other side like a marionette being yanked by strings. His neck bent at a sharp angle. Slowly, he turned his face toward the hallway, toward the camera. Sarah's blood turned to ice. He was smiling, not a normal smile. It stretched too wide. His eyes didn't blink. "Ben?" Her voice cracked. He stared at the camera, not at her, at the camera. Then he raised his hand, slowly, fingers straight like a child's wave. He waved at her. Her breath caught in her throat. The feed cut to black. "Ben!" she screamed into the walkie. "Ben, answer me!" The only reply was static. The emergency lights flickered again. This time they didn't come back on. Darkness. Pure darkness. 2:35 a.m. She sat alone in the supply closet. She was crying. She didn't remember how she got there, but she knew she couldn't go back out. Her eyes stayed on the floor. Her ears strained, listening to the dark hallway beyond the door. The walkie buzzed. It was faint, broken by static. Then, clear as a bell, she heard it. "Sarah, come out." Her heart skipped. Her hands pressed against her ears. "Sarah, you forgot to say goodbye." Her eyes filled with tears. She heard the soft tap of footsteps just outside the supply closet door. They stopped. Her breath hitched. Then, from the crack under the door, she saw it. 2 bare feet, facing her. Sarah's breath was shallow, sharp. She clamped a hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound. Her heart pounded so hard in her chest that she was sure whoever, whatever, was on the other side of that door could hear it. The feet didn't move. They were just standing there, barefoot, skin grayish-white, like it hadn't seen sunlight in years. The toes twitched, slow and unnatural, like someone trying to remember how to move. "Don't make a sound." She bit down on her own hand to stop from sobbing. Her breath came in soft gasps, muffled against her palm. The air in the supply closet was thick with the sharp smell of disinfectant and bleach. She tried to focus on that, on the smell, not on the feet. Then the feet shifted, one step closer to the door. Her eyes squeezed shut. No, no, no. A long, slow scrape echoed through the air. It wasn't the sound of feet. It was like something sharp dragging along the wood of the door. Skrrk! Her eyes darted to the crack under the door. A shadow passed across it. Something was moving down there. Slowly it reached into view. A hand. Not a normal hand. The fingers were too long, too thin, and the skin looked wrinkled, cracked like old leather. The nails were jagged, dark at the tips. The fingers drummed on the floor one by one. Tap, 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 tap. Her entire body froze. The fingers curled up into a loose fist. They rose slightly, hovering just under the crack in the door. And then, knock, knock, her heart leapt into her throat. Her back pressed hard against the wall of the supply closet. Her eyes were glued to the shadow of the hand. She bit down on her knuckle until she tasted blood. Knock, knock, knock. Sarah. The voice was soft, too soft. Not a child, not a man, not a woman. It was something in between, almost like it was using someone else's voice, but didn't know how to control it. Sarah, you forgot to say goodbye? Her whole body shook. She couldn't hold back anymore. She let out a short, sharp sob. The knocking stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. Silence, pure, suffocating silence. The feet were still there. The shadow under the door didn't move. But she knew it was listening. Her fingers shook as she reached for the walkie-talkie clipped to her side. She fumbled for the button, squeezing it hard. Ben, please answer. I'm in the supply closet. It's here, it's here. Static hissed back at her. For one long, horrifying second, she thought she heard breathing. Heavy, slow breathing, like someone holding their mouth right up to the receiver. Then she heard it again. Why won't you open the door, Sarah? The voice wasn't coming from the walkie. It was right behind her ear. Her body moved on pure adrenaline. She threw herself forward, hitting the door with her shoulder. Her hands fumbled with the handle, twisting it until it gave way. She fell out into the hallway, hitting the cold tile floor. Her head whipped around, eyes darting to the supply closet. It was empty. No one inside, no feet under the door, no fingers tapping. The air was still. The only sound was the distant hum of the old fluorescent lights. Her breathing was fast, shallow. She backed away from the door, crawling on her hands and knees until her back hit the wall. Tears streamed down her face as she hugged her knees, rocking herself slowly. I didn't see it. I didn't see it. I didn't see it. She repeated it like a mantra. The walkie on her hip buzzed. Sarah. Her breath stopped. It was Ben's voice. Sarah, where are you? Her eyes darted to the walkie. She picked it up with shaky hands. Ben! Oh my God, Ben! I'm on the 3rd floor, outside the supply closet. Stay there, he said, his voice calm, steady. I'm coming to get you. Relief hit her so hard she almost sobbed. Thank you, oh God, thank you. She sat there back against the wall, eyes locked on the end of the hallway. The door to room 312 was still cracked open. Her eyes flicked to it and away. Don't look at it, don't look at it. Her fingers drummed on the floor, trying to ground herself. Tap, 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 tap. Her heart stopped. Her eyes slowly moved to her hand. Her fingers were tapping, but she wasn't moving them. Her breath quickened. Her fingers moved on their own. Tap, 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 perfectly matching the rhythm from before. She tried to pull her hand away, but her fingers wouldn't stop. Her face crumpled in horror. Stop! 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 She shook her hand violently, and finally the tapping stopped. Her fingers went limp. Sarah. Her head snapped up. It wasn't coming from the walkie, it was coming from down the hall, from room 312. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes wide as saucers. Sarah, it's Ben, the voice called again. It was coming from room 312. No. She shook her head violently. That's not him, that's not him. Come help me, Sarah, the voice echoed, sounding just a little too far away, like it was being dragged through static. Come on, it's safe now. Her heart told her to run. Her legs didn't move. The door to room 312 creaked, slowly, slowly. It opened wider, her chest tightened, her breathing came in sharp, fast bursts. Tears welled up in her eyes. Don't look, don't give it attention, but it's so hard not to look. The hallway was so quiet, she could hear the buzzing of the fluorescent lights. Then came a new sound, footsteps, light, barefoot, coming from room 312. The light overhead flickered, once, twice, It stayed off for one long second. When it came back on, she saw it. At the end of the hall, just outside room 312, it was standing there. It was tall and thin, limbs too long for its body. Its head tilted at a crooked angle, as if it had broken its own neck. The skin on its face was grey, wet-looking and smooth. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth skin. But it knew she was there. It knew. Her legs twitched. Her body was frozen, her mind screaming at her to move, to run. It tilted its head back upright. It raised its long, bony arm, and it waved. Her scream tore through the hallway, echoing off the walls. She ran. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away. She heard its footsteps behind her, fast, heavy, too fast. Bum, 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 bum. It wasn't running. It was just there, behind her, moving faster than it should. "Help me! Help me! Please!" she screamed, slamming into the stairwell door. She threw it open and ran down the stairs, not daring to look up. Her footsteps echoed, but she heard more footsteps behind her. She didn't stop. Didn't dare stop. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, shaking, and looked at the screen. One new text message. She opened it. "You looked." The phone slipped from her hand, hitting the stairs below. Her knees buckled. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. Then she heard it again, behind her, close, too close. "Look at me, Sarah." Her scream echoed down the stairwell as the lights above flickered once, twice, and went out. The darkness in the stairwell was absolute. No glow from emergency lights, no flicker of fluorescent bulbs, just pitch black. Sarah's breath came in short, shallow bursts. Her heart pounded like a drum in her ears. She gripped the cold metal railing, fingers slick with sweat. "Don't move, don't make a sound." But she could hear it. Bum, bum, bum. Footsteps, heavy, slow, coming down the stairs. Her hands trembled. Her teeth clenched to stop from screaming. Her body pressed flat against the wall, trying to melt into the concrete. The sound of the footsteps echoed up and down the stairwell, disorienting her. Which direction is it coming from? Above? Below? It didn't matter. It was getting closer. Her phone buzzed again in her pocket. The vibration felt like a shock against her thigh. Slowly, carefully, she reached into her pocket and pulled it out. One new message. Her hands shook as she swiped the screen. Her eyes strained in the dark to read it. "Look up." Her heart stopped. Her thumb hovered over the screen. "No, no, no, don't look." But her body didn't listen. Some part of her brain, the dumb, curious part, won the battle. Her eyes flicked upward. She saw it. At the top of the stairwell, a figure leaned over the edge, head hanging upside down. Its arms dangled like a rag doll, loose and limp, but its head was tilted too far, twisted at a crooked, impossible angle. It was staring straight at her. Her body moved on instinct. Her feet slipped against the stairs as she spun and sprinted downward. Her hands gripped the railing to stop herself from falling, heart racing like a machine gun in her chest. "Run! Run! Run!" She heard it again, the footsteps, faster this time, but they weren't on the stairs. They were on the wall. Her eyes darted upward for just a second, one stupid second, and she saw it. Crawling along the wall, using its fingers and toes like claws, it moved faster than anything that size should move. It was chasing her, head twisted upside down, arms hanging loosely as it climbed. Her scream echoed through the stairwell, raw and desperate. Her legs burned with each step. Her breath was short, sharp, and painful. She didn't look back again, never again. The next landing was just ahead. She could see the metal door. She reached it, slamming into it with her full weight, her hands searching for the handle. Her fingers found it, twisted it, and shoved. The door didn't move. "No, no, no, no!" she gasped, yanking on it with both hands. It was stuck. She pulled harder, her legs braced against the ground. "Open, please!" Behind her, the sound of clawing on concrete echoed louder, closer. Her sobs came in fast, hiccuping gasps. Tears blurred her vision. Please, please, please. Bum, bum, bum. It wasn't slow anymore. It was running. She felt it in her chest, each thudding step getting closer. Her foot slipped. She spun around, her back pressed to the cold metal door. Her breath stopped in her chest. It was there, right in front of her, too close. Its face was inches from hers, upside down, tilted like it was hanging from an invisible thread. The smooth, grey skin was wet, like it had been submerged in water. It had no eyes, but somehow it was looking at her. It tilted its head to the side, like it was curious. Slowly, its head twisted back upright, its neck bones cracking one by one. Snap, snap, snap. Its face came so close to hers that she felt the wetness of its breath on her lips. Her tears ran freely now. Her whole body shook like a leaf. "You looked," it whispered. Her scream filled the stairwell. She dropped to her knees, hands over her face. Her body shook uncontrollably as she sobbed into her hands. I didn't look. I didn't look." Her eyes stayed closed. Keep them closed. Keep them closed. But the voice was right next to her ear now. "Yes, you did." 3:45 a.m. They found her in the emergency stairwell. Her knees were pulled up to her chest, her arms wrapped around her legs. She was rocking back and forth, mumbling something over and over again. "I didn't look, I didn't look, I didn't look." The paramedics tried to get her to respond, but she didn't. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, fixed on the ceiling. Her lips moved slowly, whispering the same thing over and over. They lifted her onto a stretcher, strapping her in. Her eyes never moved. But one of the paramedics swore he saw something. He swore that just for a second she smiled. 4:20 a.m. St. Augustine Memorial Hospital. Sarah was moved to the psychiatric ward on the ground floor. The nurses whispered about her. She could hear them. She saw something. She snapped. She just kept saying, "I didn't look." Margot was there. She stood by the window, watching Sarah through the glass. She hadn't seen her like this before. Her eyes were different now. "Poor girl," one of the younger nurses said, shaking her head. "Think she'll ever snap out of it?" Margot didn't answer. She kept her eyes on Sarah. Sarah was just lying in the hospital bed, her face turned toward the security camera in the corner of the room. She wasn't blinking. Her lips weren't moving anymore. She was staring directly at the camera. Margot's chest tightened. She swallowed the lump in her throat. "I've seen that look before," she muttered under her breath. The nurse frowned. "What do you mean?" Margot didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed locked on Sarah. "It's not her anymore," Margot finally said. 6:30 a.m. The night shift was over. Margot packed her things slowly, hands moving on autopilot. The tired, dead-eyed look was back. She pulled her coat over her shoulders and walked toward the hospital exit. She reached for the front doors, but they didn't open. Her brow furrowed. She tapped the sensor. Nothing. "Come on," she muttered. Her eyes flicked up to the ceiling. The lights flickered once, twice. The air grew cold. Her breath fogged in front of her face. Margot felt it. That weight, that heat, the warmth on the back of her neck, like someone breathing behind her. Her eyes slowly moved to the reflection in the glass door. Her breath caught in her chest. "Don't look, don't look, don't look," but she saw it. Not clearly, just enough. A shape, a figure behind her. Tall, crooked, too long. Her body went stiff. Her fingers curled into tight fists. "Don't turn around," she whispered to herself. "Don't turn around." The lights flickered again. She squeezed her eyes shut. Knock, knock. Her heart nearly exploded in her chest. The knock came from the glass door in front of her. Her eyes shot open. The reflection was gone. The figure was gone. The door's sensor beeped. It slid open slowly. Margot didn't wait. She walked straight out, hands shoved in her coat pockets. Her footsteps echoed on the pavement. But halfway to her car, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She stopped walking. Slowly, she pulled it out. 1, New message. Her heart pounded as she opened it. You looked. Her eyes darted to the glass of the hospital doors. There, on the other side of the glass, was Sarah. But it wasn't Sarah anymore. Her eyes were black. Her head tilted to the side. Her smile was too wide. Her lips moved slowly. Margot couldn't hear it, but she knew what she was saying. I see you. The lights outside flickered. Margot's breath came out in short, shallow gasps. Her eyes stayed locked on the glass door of St. Augustine Memorial Hospital, where Sarah was still standing. No, not Sarah. The body looked like Sarah, but her eyes were wrong. Her eyes were too black, too hollow. Her smile was too wide, stretching unnaturally across her face, like it had been cut into her skin. She didn't move. She just stood there, staring at Margot with her head tilted to the side, like she was studying her, watching. Margot's body was screaming for her to run. Every muscle in her legs twitched, but something kept her there, frozen in place. The phone buzzed in her hand again. Her whole body jolted as she glanced down. One new message. Her eyes flicked back to the glass. Sarah hadn't moved, not a single inch. Her heart pounded so hard it echoed in her ears. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Don't open it! Don't open it! But she did. Her fingers moved on their own. Her thumb swiped up. The message popped up in big, bold letters on the screen. Turn around. Her heart stopped. Her eyes shot back up to the reflection in the glass door. Her own reflection was there. Her coat, her face, her eyes wide with terror, and behind her, a shadow. It wasn't clear at first, just a blur, but it moved. Slowly. The shape leaned forward into the frame, just enough for Margot to see it. Long, thin limbs, too many joints, head tilted at an impossible angle. No face. Her throat tightened. Her breath was trapped in her lungs. Her fingers gripped her phone so tight she felt her nails dig into the plastic case. Don't turn around, she whispered to herself. Teeth clenched so hard her jaw ached. Her knees felt weak. Don't you dare turn around. The shadow moved closer in the reflection. Closer, closer. It was right behind her now. Her breath hitched as she felt it. Warm breath on the back of her neck. Her whole body went rigid. Her stomach turned. Her hands shook. Her body begged her to move, but she was stuck. The breath moved lower, slowly trailing down her neck. Her vision blurred with tears. Her chest heaved with shallow, rapid breaths. You looked. The voice whispered in her ear, slow and drawn out. Her heart stopped. Her eyes darted to the reflection. It was right behind her now, its head tilted down like it was looking at her, even though it had no eyes. Its long, bony fingers rose up slowly, curling over her shoulders, not touching her, but close enough for her to feel the cold radiating from them. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The reflection flickered, and it was gone. Her knees buckled. She dropped to the pavement, gasping, her whole body shaking like a leaf in the wind. She looked back at the hospital doors, her eyes darting left and right. No Sarah, no shadow, nothing. It was gone. Her breathing slowed. Her heart still thudded hard, but she could breathe again. She blinked hard, wiping at her eyes. Get to the car, she muttered to herself, her voice weak and cracking. Get to the car, Margot. Get to the car. Her eyes flicked to the glass one last time. Nothing there. No shadow, no Sarah, no one watching her. 6:45 a.m. Margot's apartment. Margot slammed the front door behind her, locking the deadbolt and twisting every latch. Her breath was still shallow, her mind racing. It's gone, it's gone, it's gone, she whispered, rocking back and forth, her back pressed against the door. Her coat was still on, her shoes were still on. She didn't care. She slid down to the floor, burying her face in her hands. Her fingers were still trembling. It wasn't real. It wasn't real. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Her heart stopped. Her head shot up. Her breath came in sharp, short gasps. Slowly, her hands moved to her coat pocket. Her fingers felt the cold metal of her phone. Don't check it. Just leave it. leave it in the pocket, but she couldn't. Her hand pulled it out. The screen was already on. One new message. Her thumb hovered over it. Her breath was shallow, fogging up the screen. "Don't open it, Margot. Don't do it." But she swiped it open. The text was simple. "We're inside." Her breath caught in her throat. Her head snapped up, eyes darting to the shadows in the living room. It was too dark. The shadows were too dark. The kind of darkness that isn't natural. Her eyes stayed locked on it, watching for movement. Nothing. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. Her chest rose and fell with quick, shallow breaths. Her hands felt numb. She opened it. "Look at the TV." Her eyes shot to the television. It was off. The black screen reflected the dim glow of the hallway behind her. She saw herself sitting on the floor, her knees pulled to her chest. And behind her. It was there, right behind her. No slow build-up this time. It was already there. Close. Close enough for her to see the smooth, grey, eyeless face. Close enough for her to see its fingers hanging at its sides, swaying like a pendulum. Her throat tightened. Her fingers dropped the phone to the floor. Her whole body went still. "Don't move. Don't look." But it moved first. Its head tilted toward her. Slowly. Slowly. Her reflection didn't blink. It didn't breathe. Her reflection just sat there, completely still. Her mouth opened. Her lips trembled as she whispered, barely audible, "No." The reflection smiled. Not her smile, its smile. Her reflection raised one hand and waved. Her body didn't move, but the reflection did. Slowly, the reflection of Margot placed its hands flat on the TV screen like it was pressing against the glass. Her head tilted at the same unnatural angle as it. Her smile stretched so wide it split her cheeks. The reflection leaned in, slowly, lips brushing the glass like it was about to kiss it. "I see you," it whispered. The TV flickered. The reflection was gone. Margot was frozen in place, her eyes locked on the blank TV screen, her hands gripping her knees so hard, her nails dug into her skin. She was shaking, her heart was racing, but she didn't move, she didn't breathe, she didn't blink, because she knew it wasn't gone. The air behind her grew heavy. Her breath fogged up in front of her. "Don't turn around." Her fingers dug deeper into her knees, her whole body tensing like a spring. Her breath came out in short, sharp bursts. Her teeth clenched together as her muscles twitched. "Don't turn around. Don't turn around." She squeezed her eyes shut. Her lips moved. She whispered it over and over like a prayer. "Don't turn around. Don't turn around. Don't turn around." But she heard it. Knock, knock. Her heart dropped into her stomach. It wasn't from the door. It was right next to her ear. Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't move, didn't even twitch. The warm breath came next. It smelled like rust, wet, rotten. Her eyes squeezed shut so tight that tears streamed down her face. Her body tensed like a bowstring, ready to snap. Her lips trembled. "Look at me, Margot." The voice whispered in her ear, slow and quiet, like it was smiling. Her eyes flew open, wild and full of terror. Her gaze darted left. No. Her head moved on its own. Her neck twisted slowly, painfully, her muscles locking up. Her eyes moved before her head did, and she saw it. Her scream echoed through the entire apartment complex. The lights flickered. They never came back on.